Malaking bahagi ng buhay natin ay nagaganap na online. Para mapigilan ang pagkalat ng COVID-19 virus, kinailangan nating magklase, makibalita, mamili, magnegosyo at magpadala ng pera gamit ang internet. Dahil sa digitalization, mas napapadali ang maraming bagay tulad ng komunikasyon, mga proseso at kolaborasyon gamit ang digital technologies. Sa bilis, dami at dalas ng mga aktibidad online, nariyan din ang banta at panganib sa cyberspace. Maaaring maging biktima ng cyber attacks na isinasagawa ng malicious o bad actors, mga individual o grupong naghahanap ng kahinaan sa computer, proseso o tao upang makuha ang gusto nila. May iba't ibang uri ng cyber attacks. Maaari itong simpleng pag-hack sa social media account mo, pero pwede rin itong magdulot ng panganib sa mga kritikal na serbisyo tulad ng pagputol sa supply ng tubig bunga ng pumalyang computer system. Maaari ding maging biktima ng cyber attack ang individual, mga institusyon at ang buong estado. Kaya kailangang magdoble ingat. Para maiwasang maging biktima ng cyber attacks, tandaan, ingatan at palakasin ang iyong password. Iwasan ang pag-post ng personal na information lalo na sa social media. At suriin ang mga source link ng posts bago ito i-click. Para sa mga institusyon, mainam na magkaroon ng cybersecurity policy ang organisasyon tungkol sa proteksyon ng mga assets nito tulad ng data, computers at networks. Kailangan ding magtalaga ng information security protocols sakaling magkaroon ng cyber incidents. Para sa estado, una, ipatupad ang minimum information security standards, lalo na sa critical infra tulad ng tubig, enerhiya, transportasyon at telekomunikasyon. Ikalawa, kumalap ng datos tungkol sa cybersecurity practices para masuri ang mga kahinaan ng bawat sektor. Tulad ng virus, patuloy na nagbabago ang uri at anyo ng cyber attacks. Kaya't mahalagang up-to-date ang ating security practices. Ito ang parang booster shot ng cybersecurity. Ikatlo, mag-invest sa cybersecurity professionals at gawing bahagi ng formal na edukasyon ang cybersecurity. At huli, matuto sa ginagawa ng ibang bansa. Makipagtulungan tayo sa international at local cybersecurity communities. Sa internet at totoong buhay, kailangang may pagpapahalaga tayo sa seguridad ng bawat isa. Ang cybersecurity ay responsibilidad nating lahat dahil walang ligtas hanggat lahat ay ligtas. Ang video na ito ay hatid sa inyo ng Secure Connections sa tulong ng The Asia Foundation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mimi Young, host of ANC's flagship business program, Market Edge, and I will be your host for today's event. It's my honor to welcome you to the virtual launch of Secure Connections Report, Cybersecurity in the Philippines, Global Context, and Local Challenges. Cybersecurity has been a never-ending race, but the rate of change is accelerating as the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns forced us to migrate a big chunk of our lives online, from teleconsultation, e-commerce, digital payments, remote work, and online learning. And with digitalization comes an increase in cyber threats and a wider vector for cyber attacks, especially for critical infrastructure and key industries. These attacks are more complex, costlier, and more disruptive, are happening at warp speed. It's really a global problem that in many ways are fractured regionally and locally by this fabric of preparedness, data privacy laws, and infrastructure vulnerabilities, among others. The changing global order with superpowers jostling to control technologies, online platforms, and cyber weaponry adds to the challenge of defining the Philippines' cybersecurity position. Cybersecurity in the Philippines, Global Context and Local Challenges looks at Philippine cybersecurity governance in a rapidly changing global context amidst the growing risks and challenges of digitalization. It reviews various regional and national cybersecurity governance frameworks, analyzes the major cybersecurity issues in key sectors, and recommends ways to improve the nation's cybersecurity posture. This report was prepared by Secure Connections, a coalition of stakeholders that aims to work towards the improvement of Philippine cybersecurity. Secure Connections is an initiative of the Asia Foundation, a nonprofit organization committed to improving lives across a dynamic and developing Asia. Before we begin, a few announcements. This webinar is a public event and streaming live via the Secure Connections YouTube channel. For purposes of documentation and press releases, this event is being recorded. For your questions, kindly use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom app and address your question to all panelists. In the interest of time, we will collate and synthesize questions of the same topic. A digital copy of the report will be uploaded later today. We'll provide the website link after the launch. To officially open the program, we have with us Mr. Sam Chitik, Country Representative of the Asia Foundation, Philippines. Now, over the last 20 years, Sam has worked within and alongside a range of development organizations, including the World Bank, Australian AID, the United Nations, GIZ, and non-government organizations in 14 countries across Asia and Africa, 10 years of which were in the Philippines. Currently, he oversees the Foundation's programming in the Philippines, focused on supporting economic growth, strengthening justice and the rule of law, fostering peace and development, and improving governance. He leads a large country team with offices in Manila, Cotabato, and Zamboanga, and engagements with a wide range of Philippine and international partners. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Sam Chitik.
Thank you, Michelle. I just need permission to turn the camera on. One moment.
All right.
There we go. Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you also to all of our partners from government, industry, academe, everyone who's joining here today. Magandang umaga, good morning, and thanks to everyone. A special thanks, first up, to the Department of Information Communications Technology under the leadership of the Secretary, Emmanuel Ray Kaintak, who we'll hear from a little later today. Everyone knows that the creation of DICT has really been a great step forward in terms of cybersecurity initiatives in the Philippines, including helping to set the directions under the National Cybersecurity Plan for the country. Thanks also to the others who are joining from DICT and have been really critical in leading on this space, Under Secretary Alan Silor, Director Jose Carlos Reyes, and Director and OIC Head of NCERT, Attorney Sana. Thank you to all of you and all the team at DICT. As Michelle mentioned, the Asia Foundation is really proud to have supported the Secure Connections team in this virtual launch. And importantly, in the preparation of the report, Cybersecurity in the Philippines, Global Context and Local Challenges. As a nonprofit development organization, the Asia Foundation is deeply interested in how evidence can help back public policy to improve social outcomes. And that's obviously especially relevant in the growing field of cybersecurity. We've supported Secure Connections because they're seeking to constructively contribute to improvements in the country's cybersecurity policies. For the last 2 years, as you will hear, the group has worked on preparing the research for this comprehensive Philippine cybersecurity report. The report has 3 main goals, which I hope you will take away from today. And those are in support of the goals of the DICT National Cybersecurity Plan of 2022. That plan outlined priorities to increase the nation's cyber resilience, protect the nation's critical infrastructure, and also promote greater cyber awareness amongst all of the stakeholders who need it. The report attempts to attack cybersecurity issues holistically, looking at first global frameworks, case studies of various countries, and most importantly, the Philippines' own cybersecurity posture. The report was written for both cybersecurity policymakers, of whom many are joining today, but also for the broader public and those who are interested in this issue from other sectors. It emphasizes the individual practices or cyber hygiene that must go hand in hand with systemic improvements to increase our collective resilience towards cyber threats. I hope this work is really a deepening of our understanding on cybersecurity issues, and it's relevant at the moment, given the increasing occurrences of cyber attacks that we've seen during the pandemic, but also over the last number of years. Individually, of course, all people are susceptible to data breaches and privacy violations online, and Filipinos are no different from that. And at a broader community level, cyber attacks by state or non-state actors on critical infrastructure can really undermine national security and can directly impact on economic activity. So I hope that this launch and the report and all of its contents will help to foster a crucial conversation among stakeholders and also help to propose constructive solutions to make our digital platforms more cyber secure and our daily interactions online more secure. I hope that you, as the audience, can also take the opportunity to engage directly with the authors to learn more about the research and the creative and technical process that went into gathering the research and presenting it in this way. Finally, I hope that the report's key messages can be discussed, refined, expanded, and ultimately put into practice in ways that make sense for those who are making policy in the country to bridge the gap between policy and daily practice so that we can experience tangible changes and improvements in our physical and online spaces. Maraming salamat, and thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for giving us a glimpse of what we can look forward to in the report. Indeed, this review is very relevant given the growing cyber risks and issues that affect all of us. Now, this is also a good follow-up to the Asia Foundation's publication From Analog to Digital, Philippine Policy and Emerging Internet Technologies, which was launched back in 2018. Now, cybersecurity is a new and fast-evolving field and can be a daunting challenge for any organization. So you can only imagine how an organization tasked to oversee cybersecurity for the whole of government as well as key sectors. Our keynote speaker for today is at the helm of that agency mandated to do exactly that. We're honored to have with us Department of Information and Communications Technology, Acting Secretary Emmanuel Ray Caintic. Acting Secretary Emmanuel Ray Mani R. Caintic was first appointed as the Assistant Secretary for Digital Philippines in 2019. Under his supervision, he reinforced the administration's priority programs on connectivity by expediting their rollout and expanding their coverage. He has also championed the Digital Cities and Provinces program, or Digital Cities 2025, to further spur IT business process management, or IT-BPM, industries development and investments in the countryside. Now, this aims to motivate investors in expanding the industry beyond the metropolitan areas. He took the lead in DICT's role in developing and managing ICT projects in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and served as the member of the IATF MEID and chairperson of the Sub-Technical Working Group on Information and Communications Technology Solutions. His initiatives as chair of the Sub-TWG aided in the whole of government COVID-19 response and recovery efforts through the use of ICT. These efforts were given further recognition in January 2021 when he was appointed as the Undersecretary for Digital Philippines and in December 2021 as the Acting Secretary of the DICT. Prior to his service in the government, he actually ran a career of more than 20 years in the hybrid industry of business management, finance information technology, financial technology or fintech, and the digitization of government. Mr. Caintic has driven teams in corporations, managed colleagues and clients, and envisioned, implemented, and succeeded in various projects. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Acting Secretary Emmanuel Ray Caintic. Secretary?
Good morning to everyone. Good morning to my friends from the Asia Foundation and Secure Connections. It is my great pleasure to be invited in this event today, as I have looked forward to the contributions of Secure Connections since they started working with the DICT Cybersecurity Bureau a couple of years back, almost a couple of years back. The efforts of Secure Connections started with a very thorough focus group discussion with many of the government stakeholders as well as critical information infrastructures. And why did they do this? And why did we ask them to do this? As you well know, there has been a cybersecurity management plan 2022, or the roadmap, that is. But today is already the 5th year of that plan. And we asked Secure Connections to make a thorough assessment of where we really stand at this point in time. The focus group discussion had a very, very clear survey set of questions that focus on identifying the state of cybersecurity readiness by these government agencies, as well as critical information infrastructure entities. And I'm glad with the result of that survey and study that resulted to them drafting an executive order, which I hope either this president or the next will be able to push, which is an executive order for minimum standards to be set by to be followed by government agencies pursuant to our cybersecurity plan. And that is the meat of this effort, of this 2-year effort by Secure Connections. And I look forward to listening to the summit and discovering what we can do to help push forward this executive order, which should be followed by government agencies as well as our critical information infrastructures and the sectors therein. So again, thank you so much to my good friends, Grace, William, and the rest of Secure Connections and the Asia Foundation for taking the time to consolidate all your efforts, and then as we move forward to creating a cybersecure Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Acting Secretary Manny Caintic, for championing cybersecurity and for sharing with us your initiatives, vision for a cybersecure country. I think we can all agree that cybersecurity should be one of the priorities of the government as it pushes for digitalization. And we, the stakeholders, must do our part in achieving a cyber-resilient Philippines. Now, before we proceed, we'd like to request our guest of honor, Secretary Manny Caintic, and our speakers, of course, and Secure Connections experts, to please indulge us with a photo op as I call your name. Kindly turn on your video so we can include you in the gallery. So we're calling on Secretary Manny Caintic. Please turn your video on. Mr. Sam Chitik, Dr. William Yu, Mr. Lito Averia, Mr. Liel Pascual, Attorney Army Evardone, Ms. Grace Mirandilla Santos, Mr. Nino Gutierrez, and of course, Mr. Jaime Faustino. He's the Asia Foundation's Coalitions for Change program head. All right, Froy, I think Froy is going to take charge of the photo op.
All right, I will be taking the photo. Please flash your warmest smile for our virtual photo op. Ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Another one, please. All right. All right. Ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for flashing your warmest and brightest smiles. At this point, we'd like the attendees to answer a poll, and the question we will flash on your screens. All right, the question is, what should be the next administration's #1 cybersecurity priority? We will reveal the results before we end the program. Again, we ask all of our attendees to please answer the poll. The question is, what should be the next administration's #1 cybersecurity priority? Do you answer that? We'll reveal the results before we end the program. Now, it's time to introduce the report, starting with its authors and the people who worked hard to complete this review over the past 2 years. The authors from Secure Connections are a combination of veteran industry practitioners and experts, namely Mr. Angel Lito S. Averia Jr., Government Processes and Systems Expert, Mr. Gamaliel Pascual, Banking and Finance Expert, Dr. William Emmanuel Yu, Network Security Expert. Ms. Mary Grace Mirandilla Santos, ICT Policy Analyst. They're also joined by Attorney Army Evardone, Legislative Process Expert. Now, Secure Connections boasts some of the most promising young researchers on technology and policy. We have Angelo Nino Gutierrez, Dan Mejes, Bas Claudio, and Froland Tahale. With contributing writers Kim Pobre, Justine Mendoza, Firth Manaysay, and Rana Pintor. Secure Connections also welcomes its newest members, Tani Basman, Christina Batalla, and Gerald John Guillermo. And now, for the main event. As the first comprehensive assessment of the country's cybersecurity posture, this report endeavors to make sense of the various issues and challenges faced by public institutions and key industries, especially critical infrastructure such as power, water, and telecommunications. Looking at regional and national cybersecurity frameworks from other countries, the report provides key recommendations to help shape the Philippines' own cybersecurity policy and strategy, and inform decision makers about the important role that cybersecurity plays in economic growth, national security, and the overall well-being of the Filipino people. To give us an overview of the highlights and key messages of the report, we have Ms. Grace Mirandilla Santos and Dr. William Yu. Now, Grace believes that cyber threats should not be a barrier to connecting people. That is why she's pursuing policy to promote cybersecurity. She's an independent policy researcher currently working on broadband cybersecurity research projects with the Asia Foundation and the Asian Development Bank. Grace, who's also an advocate of Better Internet Philippines, is the ICT policy analyst and team lead of Secure Connections. Meanwhile, William is a passionate advocate of shaping internet and technology policy. He runs technology for MDI Novare, working on various projects involving digital transformation, elastic infrastructure, and end-to-end agile DevOps. William is an active technology advocate with organizations such as the Internet Society, PHCERT, PPCRV, and the DICT. He also teaches at the Ateneo de Manila University. William is the network security expert of Secure Connections. Grace?
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Secure Connections, I would like to thank Secretary Manica Intik for joining us today. It actually took us 2 years to complete this report, and our partnership and discussions with the DICT definitely informed our writing and analysis. We are committed moving forward to continue engaging with the government, the private sector, especially the CERTs, and the ICT community in pursuing initiatives to improve cybersecurity. If I may share my slide, please. Thank you. So first slide, please. Many believe that the pandemic accelerated digital transformation, but before 2020, rapid digitalization was already making breakthroughs in developed countries. The fourth industrial revolution has brought us AI, machine learning, robotics, blockchain, 5G, all anchored on digital technologies and being super connected, forcing people to go digital and changing the way we live, we learn, work, and play. However, every technology-enabled advancement throughout history carries with it unique and new risks. Long before the computer was invented, theft, fraud, and violation to one's privacy were already a crime. When the computer and the internet entered the picture, doing these offenses just became faster, more efficient to carry out, and the damage became wider, more complicated, and costlier for the victim. The benefit of accelerated digitalization is now intertwined with enhanced or renewed cyber threats. Malicious actors are always lurking and waiting to strike, given the right opportunity, and exploit our weakest and most vulnerable points. The first example would be the I Love You virus, the first truly global computer virus created by a Filipino at that in the year 2000. I Love You was believed to have infected tens of millions of computers, inflicting damages amounting to 10 billion US dollars. What made this virus so effective was that it exploited a very basic human vulnerability, the need to receive affection. So if you're familiar with the virus and you were one of the victims of the I love you virus, no judgment. It is very, very effective. The second example is the COVID-19 pandemic that we're facing today. While the world is battling a real world virus, bad actors worked doubly hard to exploit a crisis, a public health crisis. In the first few months of 2020, at the height of the pandemic, there were thousands upon thousands of malwares, malicious URLs, spam messages, and phishing attempts, all related to COVID-19. Ransomware groups increased and targeted healthcare institutions, resulting in the paralysis of critical services. And online fraud was really thriving, with fictitious websites asking for donation for COVID-19 relief. Cyber attacks are not limited to individuals and organizations. The disruption of critical infrastructure is now becoming a weapon of cyber warfare. Cyber threat actors, some of whom are state-sponsored, they're very established, very well-funded, can wreak havoc on vital facilities such as power grids and telecommunications networks. The objective is to do harm to entire populations as an offensive or defensive against a rival state. Next slide, please. We now live in a world defined by the internet, whether we like it or not. But the global internet is fast eroding, and the geographical borders that were once blurred by the internet are now re-emerging. The splintering of the internet reflects how different countries view cyberspace and hence respond to cybersecurity issues differently. The first approach is the open and distributed internet, led by the United States and promoted by countries like Australia and other liberal democracies. Now, this model is anchored on the principles of consensus building, the freedom of information flow, and the promotion of individual rights. Western concepts of privacy, personal security, and confidentiality are translated into electronic means. And for this type of model, the development of standards such as the IP is also based on open governance. The next model is the state-controlled, centrally managed internet promoted by the likes of China, Russia, and other like-minded states. The development of standards in this model rely on centralized top-down approach. The state preserves the desired social order online through controls such as user traceability, censorship, and legal interception. Now, there is also a phenomenon called fragmentation, where the states become increasingly assertive with imposing rules, policy, regulation, and standards on access, the way people access the internet, what content they access on the internet, and the technologies that they use for their own national internet network. Filtering, blocking, and the localization of data are just a few examples of how governments, whether liberal, authoritarian, or somewhere in between, contribute to the fragmentation of the internet. Now, the Philippines' cybersecurity posture depends on the kind of governance it wants to pursue as a nation. It can learn and adopt different features from various countries, whichever reflect or share its own principles and values. Next slide, please. So a comprehensive, robust national framework aligned with global best practices is an essential tool in securing cyberspace. Now, there are various frameworks that can be used for crafting a national cybersecurity policy and strategy. For national policies, there is the Budapest Convention of 2001. By far, it's the only international regional framework pertaining to cybersecurity with the status of a treaty obligation among states that signed it. The APEC framework for security in the digital economy that was released in 2019 identifies general strategies, but this one is focused on helping facilitate cross-border trade, investment, and economic growth. In the EU, they have the Cybersecurity Act of 2019, which mandates the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, or ENISA, to create a cybersecurity certification framework for products and services that are being exchanged within the Union. For organizations, we have frameworks like the US NIST Cybersecurity Framework, and this one is centered around a set of core functions that will help an organization achieve a robust cybersecurity posture. There are also frameworks that focus on specific areas, such as NATO's Manual on International Law applicable for cyber warfare, and of course, the US Clean Network Initiative, which seeks to promote an internationally accepted, technologically neutral standard of digital trust. Now, a direct result of the US Clean Network Initiative is that it excludes components produced by Chinese government affiliates in 5G networks. Next slide, please. So a cybersecurity framework essentially answers the fundamental questions. What constitutes cybersecurity? Who is responsible for it, and what protections will be put in place? Now, looking at the cybersecurity frameworks of select countries, the report found 6 of the most common threads, such as economic growth and prosperity, which is becoming more and more a top objective of why we need to protect cybersecurity. Cybersecurity policies can pertain to laws or policies that specifically address cybersecurity and or cybercrime, and it essentially establishes acceptable norms of behavior in cyberspace, which generally, of course, for many nations is about the peaceful use of cybersecurity, or cyberspace rather. Cybersecurity culture is another one. This entails raising awareness for organizations, for the government, for the public, and the need to have a highly skilled cybersecurity workforce. The Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT, which is essentially a group of experts who respond to cyber incidents, is also a common thread among the cybersecurity frameworks we see in many nations. Now, throughout the years, the role of the CERTs have evolved to also include monitoring and reporting of incidents, malware analytics, cybersecurity awareness and training, among others. And there, of course, there's also the cybercrime response, and finally, the need to protect national security by protecting critical infrastructure, which have been increasingly dependent on ICT systems. Next slide, please. So the table here shows the common elements found in national cybersecurity frameworks. And as you can see, critical infrastructure and strong cybersecurity defense systems are the most common elements among select countries, including the Philippines. Next slide, please. The rapid pace of digitalization and the growth of the whole digital ecosystem means that there is now a larger threat landscape and significant increase in cybersecurity risks. However, in the Philippines, cybersecurity is not seen as that critical yet. Because the country is still at the initial stage of digital transformation, of course, it was accelerated by the pandemic, there seems to be a misconception that we are not a target of malicious actors and that the cyber risks are pretty low. This kind of mindset, however, affects the decisions that the country, that the government and organizations make about investing in cybersecurity. It actually makes the country all the more vulnerable and is now a better target if you think about it, which could, of course, result in economic losses, damages. So we have to be careful about correcting this mindset. The country is at the stage of developing the institutional arrangement for cybersecurity. So while this might be seen as too late by some, it can actually be a good opportunity because now we're seeing and learning from other countries. Under RA 10844, the DICT has the mandate to promote cybersecurity through policy and standards, but of course, challenges remain. It is very important that cybersecurity initiatives be considered a top priority, not only by the DICT, but also by the management, the leadership of various government agencies, especially those that operate critical infrastructure. Next slide, please. What is critical infrastructure? It's essentially the assets, systems, and networks, whether physical or virtual, that are considered so vital to the nation that their destruction or disruption would have a debilitating impact on things we hold dearly, like national security, health, safety, or the economic well-being of citizens, or the combination of these things. Now, next slide, please. In the critical infrastructure ecosystem, there are components such as the computers, ICT networks, and digital assets that are used for the operation and maintenance of critical infrastructure. These make up what's called the critical information infrastructure, or CII. Cybersecurity is primarily focused on protecting CII. Now, to talk about the criteria for defining critical infrastructure and to give you some, discuss the examples of what can be considered critical infrastructure and the institutions that are responsible for them, as well as the key recommendations, basically, of the report on how to improve the Philippine cybersecurity posture, I'd like to call on my colleague, Dr. William Yu. William?
Hello, and thank you very much, Grace, for covering the first part of the presentation. So as mentioned by Grace, we have taken an approach which focuses on what are the key things that are important for us and what needs to be protected, hence the focus on critical infrastructure and particular focus on critical information infrastructure. Next slide, please. Right, so how do we define critical infrastructure? So there is quite a deviation from different markets, countries, and groups on how critical infrastructure is defined. However, there are some common threads that we have studied basically when we were doing the report. And here are the four most common criteria in which a particular piece of infrastructure would be defined as critical. So the first one is, of course, size, right? If a particular piece of infrastructure affects, say, the whole country, then it is more critical than a piece of infrastructure that only affects a single person, right? So the geographical scope of a particular area, system, or sector is one of the key criteria in defining critical infrastructure. The second one is with respect to casualties. If the outage or the suppression of a particular piece of infrastructure would cause danger with respect to life and limb, then it could be considered critical as well. So, for example, if the availability of water were to be disrupted for an extended period of time, then it could affect a large number of people with respect to sickness and illness as well. The third is economic effects, so the significance of economic loss, and of course the unavailability of important products and services could also affect us, right? So the more an economic effect would affect the country, it also has a consequent effect of having an effect on the safety of people as well. So that's why economic effects tend to be a major factor and criteria as well. And of course, last but not the least, are public effects. So this basically are software effects that affect the public confidence, which will cause, for example, things like physical suffering and disruption of daily life or loss of essential services. So these are aspects normally provided by the government, right? And the unavailability of these services can cause disruption as well. Things like perception because of media, for example, if the lack of broadcast media and the lack of information with respect to a particular natural disaster can cause a disruption in public confidence, then that is something that affects public effects, and that particular piece of infrastructure, in this case broadcast media, is defined as part of critical infrastructure. So these are the four main areas. And let's cover some examples. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yep. So here are some of the common themes we've seen in different countries. So we basically study the definition of CI from the United States, European Union, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, and of course our own. We have various definitions and various sectors that have been included as critical infrastructure. So first is government or public services, including emergency services. Of course, there's power and energy, which I think in the last, typhoon, all that during the Christmas season, we've felt this particular disruption as well. There's also water, banking, and finance, right? So the outage of important clearinghouse systems can disrupt the move of money within the system. Of course, there's the communications, there's health and transportation. So these are some of the important sectors that are commonly defined amongst these countries. Next slide, please. In the Philippines, we do have an attempt at defining critical infrastructure and critical information infrastructure. So, of course, in law, we have RA 10175, or the Cybercrime Prevention Act, that defines critical infrastructure in Section 2, letter J. We also have the Office of the President Memorandum Order 37, series of 2001, that covers important critical infrastructures in the light of terrorist activities. We have the DOE Department Order 2004 to 22, which basically covers critical infrastructure in the power and energy sector. Of course, importantly, National Cybersecurity Plan of 2022, which is being revised, also covers a definition of critical infrastructure, which is quite aligned with RA 10175. And we have the ICT Memorandum Circular number 5, which was released in August of 2007, that further clarifies the definition and protections for critical infrastructure that was defined as part of the National Cybersecurity Plan of 2022. Next slide, please. In our laws, issuances, and memorandum orders, here are the collation of areas that have been defined as critical infrastructure in the Philippines. So we have government or public sector, there's transportation, land, air, and sea, power and energy, water, health, emergency service and disaster response, banking and finance, telecommunications, media, and of course, unique to the Philippines, business process outsourcing. Next slide, please. So in our case, we do have some criteria as well. So it involves both public and private entities who own, operate, control, and maintain critical infrastructure. So it doesn't have to be a public entity, or it doesn't have to be specifically a private entity. There are many private entities in the Philippines that do operate critical infrastructure. We have two criteria in terms of size. So one is if it operates nationwide, like NGCP, for example, the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, then it is automatically considered critical infrastructure. Or if it covers a major metropolitan area, so for example, Metro Manila, Metro Cebu, Metro Davao, and soon to be declared as a major metropolitan area, Metro Cagayan de Oro, are also parts of parts of the definition in terms of size for critical infrastructure. Next slide, please. Of course, here are just some examples to give us a context, but not to preempt the report. So we will have the report will contain a lot more details with respect to the definition of critical infrastructure. But for example, in the case of energy, we have the Energy Regulatory Commission, and an example would be NGCP. In terms of water, we have the NWSS, and the major water concessionaires, Manila Water and Maynilad, for example, in the metropolitan Manila area. For banking and finance, we have the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, and the key critical information infrastructure here would be the clearing houses, or the financial clearing houses that power services like Instanet and InstaPay and PesoNet that have been very, very important, particularly in this time of pandemic, due to the increased adoption of digital payments and digital money transfers in the Philippines. So an outage of these clearinghouse platforms could cause a substantial disruption, for example, in the flow of commerce. Next slide, please. And of course, transportation. So you have the OT and the civil aviation Authority of the Philippines, the airlines, and the cargo operators are part of this. In telecommunications, the regulators, the National Telecommunications Commission, and the telecommunication companies themselves, which are generally national in scope, or at least they cover large metropolitan areas, would be some of the CIIs that covered under this. Broadcast media, we also have the National Telecommunications Commission that governed this area in terms of, at least in terms of radio spectrum, and the major broadcasters as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so that basically covers the definition of critical infrastructure. And as I said at the start of my presentation, we would like to focus on these areas because these are areas that have a significant impact in how we live. Critical information infrastructure are information systems that are prone to these types of attacks that we are seeing increase in this particular time. Now, here are some of the other recommendations, specific recommendations, outside protection information infrastructure that we would like to cover. So first group of recommendations cover what we call the knowledge gap. So we have to create greater awareness of global and local cybersecurity. This is particularly important in this time because, as Grace mentioned a while ago, there is still this belief that we are not a target, right? Or we're too small, or we're not basically interesting enough for cyber threats to be of significance here in the Philippines. However, with the franchiseification, for example, of malware, anybody can actually take malware and buy it and actually run a particular attack. And this has become a lot more pervasive lately, particularly in time of pandemic when people are more tied in to technology or dependent on technology. That's why awareness is important and the acceptance that we are actually part of this threat landscape now. Next point. So we also need to generate and analyze local data. So a lot of the information we have right now are basically either global or regional in scope. So the ability to get local information, particularly at the sectoral level. So sector divides it into like financial, for example, or power or utility sector, will allow us to will inform us better, and therefore we are now in a better position to create policies that address those gaps. Now, lack of information makes it difficult to create new policies or new actions in order for us to solve, for example, information security gaps and issues. And that's the reason why one of the main activities we're doing as part of Secure Connections, as mentioned by Acting Secretary in Intake, was basically to get a lay of the land, right? To do a study on the security posture of major public agencies. The third is to nurture an environment of cooperation and information sharing among not just local, but also international communities. Again, because one person's incident can be another person's lesson. So far, we have been geographically blessed because normally cyber incidents, worms, for example, tend to spread in the Western markets first, which basically wake up first, then they get hit first, then it hits us later. However, that gap is closing, right? Again, with respect to the falsification of cyber malware and malware as a service, we actually are seeing attacks that are targeted to us directly. But it's still important to learn, right? So cyber threat analysis sharing is one of those important points as well. All right, next. And the second one is basically a policy gap. We strongly feel at Secure Connections that the adoption and enforcement of minimum information security standards to protect critical infrastructure and public institutions should be minimum policy recommendations. So we should set some baseline. Now, like a vaccine, for example, the minimum information security standards are not the cure-all, right? It will not solve all your health or cybersecurity issues, but at least it is a minimum baseline, and that is what we need at this point. We need some minimum protections. Now, a lot of these minimum information security standards are not too hard to implement. I mean, there are some that are more complicated, but they can be adapted based on a risk management framework. Different sectors have different levels of risk with respect to their information security infrastructure. and therefore they can adapt different standards that are applicable to their particular sector. So for example, the banking and finance sector will take its cue from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas issuances at the local level, and at an international level, they have PCI, for example, that defines standards as well. But we strongly feel that the implementation and the enforcement of minimum information security standards must be in place. And the last gap we intend to address is, of course, the skills gap. Right? So like any new initiative, we require an army, right, to actually help us. So we need the skills, and we need to build up these skills. Cybersecurity is cybersecurity is a job of all of us. It's not just the job of the ICT, or it's not just the job of the information security department in your organization or your company. Basically, cybersecurity culture or cybersecurity awareness is the job of everybody, right? And that's the reason why it is important that cybersecurity awareness be built at the general population level. But at the same time, we also need specialist skills in order to defend against increasing threats, information security threats. We also need a large group of cybersecurity professionals. Fortunately for us in the Philippines, we do have quite an IT-aware base and population, including a large number of IIT graduates that can serve as a pool for creating these cybersecurity professionals. So that's the last recommendation, that we actually build that as well. Right, so these are our key recommendations, and we are secure connections, as mentioned as part of the introduction video a while ago. In case you missed it, walang ligtas kung hindi lahat ay ligtas. So thank you very much, and have a good morning.
Thank you so much, William and Grace, for giving us a sneak peek into the report's analysis and recommendations. And if I may, just highlight some of the key messages that you guys mentioned. We need to raise awareness. The global context, it's as important as understanding the local challenges of cybersecurity, especially at the sectoral level. Critical infrastructure requires stringent security measures, but minimum information security standards must be applied across the board. And you've got cybersecurity, as you said, is everyone's responsibility. I think I speak for everyone here when I say we're all excited to read the report from end to end. Now we've come to the most exciting part of this event, the open forum. And first, we would like to hear from representatives from key government agencies and the private sector. Please do limit your comment or questions to 2 minutes. And we'd like to start with Director Carlos Reyes from the DICT Cybersecurity Bureau. We're privileged to have him here. Director Caloy, go ahead. Okay. Director Caloy, your audio, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much,
Right.
Ms. Michelle, Grace, and William. In behalf of our Secretary, Emmanuel Gaintik, and our newly installed Undersecretary for Cybersecurity, Maria Victoria Castro, we have been working with the group of Ms. Grace and William, the Secure Connect and the Asia Foundation, in crafting and drafting the National Cybersecurity Plan 2022. Relative to this one, we have been focusing our efforts still on our key imperatives, which is the protection of the critical information infrastructure, government networks, business and supply chain, and individuals, addressing most, if not all, the recommendations as mentioned by Dr. William earlier, specifically on the development of standards and guidelines for CII and the government, and the capacity building and competency improvement of our staff, including that of our partners in the identified sectors in the governments, which is deemed classified as critical information infrastructure. Just to give some additional inputs also, we have been working with the Office of Transport Security to cover land, sea, and rail relative to the transportation sector, and the Presidential Communications Operations Office for the media sector. So I guess in the meantime, thank you very much again, William, Grace, and Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kaloy, for sharing your valuable insights as head of the DICT Cybersecurity Bureau. Now, I think it's time that we hear from the academe. We have with us Dr. Sherwin Ona of the De La Salle University. Dr. Ona, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear, sir.
Thank you, Michelle. And first of all, congratulations to the team, Secure Connections, for finishing this report. I hope to read your report from from start to end. And of course, thank you for the presentation of Dr. Yu and Miss Grace Santos. Okay, now you can get many lessons from COVID-19, and one of them is even in a public health emergency, no one is exempt from cyber attacks or disruptions caused by these attacks. No? So, and another thing is that looking at current events, world events, at that we can see the ferocity of these threats being operationalized, cyber attacks, and even the weaponization of information. It's quite amazing how state actors can really use all of these tools for their own interests. Now, as an academic, I've always advocated for a lens to interpret this phenomenon. No? And such a lens is viewing it through the lens of human security, cybersecurity as a non-traditional threat, which is consistent with what Dr. Yu mentioned about the profound effects of these threats to a large segment of the population. Dr. Yu was, I think, spot on when he mentioned that this is not only an organizational or an individual concern, but also societal concern, thus requiring a whole of society response. I believe also that Ms. Santos is correct when she said that when you talk of cybersecurity, policymakers will just tell you now, well, it's not our focus. There are many more important issues besetting the country today, hunger, for instance, and even we're not yet out of the woods in terms of the pandemic. So I believe that policymakers will prioritize that, which is now, a challenge, for us who are advocating for an enhanced posturing in terms of cybersecurity. In my own writings, I don't anymore use cybersecurity, but cyber defense. It's a more active posture in terms of securing the information environment. My question is to both speakers will be if you are going to talk to a policymaker, how will you convince the policymaker? For instance, how will you explain to a policymaker the issue of prioritizing? No? If you listen to the presentation and perhaps read the report, there are a lot of suggestions or recommendations, and a policymaker, especially a non-technical policymaker, will be drowned in complexity. No? If you're going to prioritize, what will you prioritize? And another issue that I am putting forward to our speakers is the issue of sustainability. As you know, political cycles in the Philippines are limited, right? We have only a 6-year term for a president, and afterwards we have a new administration coming in, and that entails a change in policy. So how do you now sustain this with the high amount of investment that it would entail? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ona, for your excellent questions and insights. Before I turn you over to the authors to respond to those, we'd like to remind all of our audience to please do take time to answer the poll. If you haven't yet, what should be the next administration's #1 cybersecurity priority? And for those who have questions, please type them into the Q&A box. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So now we'd like to turn you over to the authors, Grace and William, to respond to the questions and comments from the two reactors. Ladies first, Grace, and then we'll go to William.
Thanks, Mimi. Thank you, Director Kaloy and Dr. Ona, for your questions and comments. First of all, talking to policymakers, this is definitely a challenge. And over the years, we have experienced how we have been rejected actually by many of these policymakers because, of course, the priority is usually sectoral in nature, the topic at hand when it comes to legislation. But this is actually a great challenge and opportunity. That's why we are building in Secure Connections, a coalition that will bring together people who are not only proponents of cybersecurity, but perhaps also the victims of cybersecurity. Those who are operating, maintaining critical infrastructure, institutions during the COVID-19 pandemic, such as the healthcare institutions, the banks, and those who use fintech. I think an important way of convincing decision makers is to show the damage that cybersecurity incidents can cause. So responding to incidents actually can be much more costly than trying to prevent it, because the damage, it cascades. It's not restricted in one organization, and we've seen this in many instances in past cyber incidents, such as the SolarWinds incident, and critical infrastructure being compromised in other countries. So showing the economic losses and the damage that cyber incidents can cause, I think, would actually be a good way of convincing decision makers that this can actually happen in the Philippines. William, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Grace. And you do raise a very good point about being rejected in the last few years. And to add to what Dr. Ona mentioned a while ago, we always get that, right? Why spend on cyber when we need more classrooms, or we need more roads, or we need more for people who need it? So definitely it's a challenge. But yes, the first thing that we would do is basically prioritize. That's the reason why the focus of the report is really critical information infrastructure. I think in the whole of government approach and the whole of society approach that we would like to take, we should be protecting everything, but that would be too intimidating, and that would be too large a challenge. So first thing is really focus on critical information security infrastructure. As a matter of fact, we've set the bar so low that we're not saying protect critical information infrastructure. We're just saying minimum information security standards for critical information infrastructure. The bar is really, really low. But we still feel that having that bar is an important first step. Right? So that's the first thing. Policy-wise, we must agree that these key critical information infrastructure should be protected. That's one. The second point, that the second most important thing that we'd like to make is, of course, information. That's the reason why CERT and computer emergency response is important. Being able to know that we have a vulnerability here, we've been attacked there was a breach here, there was a breach there, is important as well. And that's the reason why CERT reporting, I think, is number 2. We need to be able to know that we're actually being victims. We actually have to know, because we can't convince policymakers that this is an important problem if we can't quantify the problem. So I think that's number 2. We need to be able to know where we are and what the state. And that's the reason why one of our original activities as part, and we're still doing it right now, is actually to do a survey, right? To see what the state of information security is. We started with the public sector, but of course we're hoping to expand that to many sectors as well. And last but not the least is, of course, development, right? Cybersecurity awareness is very important. But as far as we're concerned, we're setting, again, the bar very low. We're just saying that all CII and all public institutions must have cybersecurity professionals. We're not setting a very high bar that says, you have to have cybersecurity awareness training for everybody right away. Right? We're starting with something a little more practical and a little smaller. Now, we understand that it's easier said than done, right? I mean, we're still having trouble filling data privacy officers in all of government, much less a chief information security officer, for example, or a cybersecurity professional. But those are the 3 things that we'd probably start with, right? Minimum information security standards, particularly for CII. Incident reporting, a structure and system for incident reporting, which we have in the CERT process. And I believe NCERT is here right now, so that's a good start. And the third is really capability building. And we'll start basically with just having a person that is actually aware of these threats and can focus on that. So I actually start with those three. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, William and Grace. Before we move on to the Q&A from the audience members, I wanted to pick up from what Grace mentioned earlier. You have to show the Filipinos that this thing costs, that being attacked, these cyber threats, these risks will cost us a lot of money, and that this could happen in the Philippines, all sounding very hypothetical. Have we actually experienced, in your recollection, a major cyber hacking incident that would be enough to wake Filipinos up, or policymakers up, that, hey, this is important? I mean, you look at what happened in other countries. In the US last year, their main gasoline pipeline was hacked. The Colonial Pipeline was hacked and people could not find gasoline. They were lining up for days. They felt it. They would have a greater appreciation for cybersecurity. In Ukraine and Russia, to as simple as hacking into a system that gave these malicious actors access to the cell phone numbers of banking clients and sending a text blast telling them, you know, this bank in Ukraine is closing down. There's going to be a bank run, and then causing panic. Something of that scale. In your recollection, William, Grace, has the Philippines experienced something of that scale, enough to wake everybody up to the importance of cybersecurity?
Great. So I can take that. So I have three, right? So just indulge me. The first one is the Comileak incident of 2016. It may be a while back, right? We're already in 2022 and we're talking about a leak in 2016, but we are still feeling the effects of that leak up to today. I mean, I am pretty sure that you can't use mother's maiden name or your birthday anymore as a security question because of that leak, right? So it's important. Now, I use that example because it is also one of those cases where minimum information security standards could have helped, right? So basic cyber hygiene and basic information security practice could have helped with that. So that was an example. So the Comileak of 2016. Now we have something like, I work in the industry now, and I am pretty sure that there are a lot of ransomware attacks now, and these have affected a lot of organizations. They may not make the news because it's not really required. But the more recent BDO, Union Bank, blockchain, cryptocurrency incident is another example of that, right? You will see a particular incident where, you know, it might be a particular heist, right? Of course, you also have the Bangladeshi bank one that's a little older, but you see here that there are cases where the bank can do all at once, right? Can secure its systems all at once, but there are still more basic things that we can do as individuals ourselves. And the third example I'd like to give is the more recent press reader incident. Now, not a lot of people may know about this, but that's an example of a systemic attack, right? So press reader is a service provider for news, a news organization so that you can publish your newspapers or magazines online. Inquirer is one of the clients of press reader. Press reader was hacked because it pulled out articles from about the Ukraine-Russia war. Now, the target was press reader. It was about a war that is happening halfway around the world, but a news organization in the Philippines was hit. Now, that's the thing about information security. You have systemic problems that even though you were not the target, Inquirer definitely was not the target there. Press reader was, but it affected Inquirer. So the first example is an example of the long tail of breaches like this. It hits you, and you can still feel the effects up to now. The second one is something where you can put protections in one part of the system or another part of the system, but all it takes is one hole, right? Then the bad actors can get in. And the third is you may actually not be the target, but you can still get hit. Right, so those are three examples at least. There are many more and many interesting stories, but that I'll stop with that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, William and Grace, for the on-point answers and great discussion points. I'm now ready to read questions from our audience. Again, to our audience members, please do join the conversation. Type in your questions in the Q&A box and we'll address them. Please address them to all panelists so we'll be able to read. And we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. We'd also like to inform you that Director Kaloy Reyes will also be available to answer questions on behalf of the DICT Cybersecurity Bureau. All right, we have question number 1, and this is for Mr. Lito Averia. The question is, does the assessment provided by Secure Connections also cover the COMELEC security infrastructure? What policies can the government implement to ensure the integrity of elections? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. It's quite a question. We did a general assessment of government agencies, as a whole, not on specific government agencies. But what we did was to launch a survey. We conducted a survey through the DICT, and we are just collating the results of the survey today. So we'll come up with another report specifically on covering the survey questions that we had. What policy, with regards to the policy environment, again, we are pushing minimum information security standards as a starting point. And then depending on the levels of and criticality of the government agencies, the ones that are running critical infrastructure specifically, and mission critical systems. Election systems, of course, are mission critical. Although this is a one-day affair, preparing for that and securing the election systems is really critical. So depending on the levels of criticality, then the government agencies should adopt higher levels of security beyond the minimum information security standards that we are pushing.
Lito, earlier, William said the bar has been set so low. And I know that you're conducting an assessment of government agencies and the results are just about to come in. But based on the latest assessment that you did, how would you rate our cybersecurity preparedness for these government agencies from your perspective? I mean, a malicious actor wants to attack now. How prepared are our government agencies? On a rate of 1 to 10.
That's a sad state of affairs, right? On cybersecurity.
How sad?
Right now, I was just reading about the press release of NAPOCOR. The DAM information management system has been attacked about 19 hours ago. So that gives us an indication of the preparedness of our government agencies, especially the ones that are running critical or regulating critical infrastructures, right? So it would be difficult to put a number to it, but I guess relatively it's still low, the readiness.
And I'm very curious, Lito, if you look around us, which country would you think can be a model, a best practices model for preparedness of governments when it comes to cybersecurity?
There's a number. Well, if we talk about the ASEAN region, there's Singapore, right? Okay. To include, of course, our Asian neighbors, Japan would also be. They have a strong practice in terms of cybersecurity. Globally, the number one I can cite is Estonia.
Estonia.
Yes. They're the most wired country in the world, and they're the most advanced in terms of cybersecurity practice.
Wow. It's a very small European country, Estonia. Right. Okay, we learn something new every day. Thank you, Lito, for that. We have another question here. This one is for Dr. William Yu. William, is there data on the existing levels of cybersecurity workforce technical capacity in the Philippines?
Right. That's another good question, and actually that's a question that has been asked recently, so I could guess who asked the question. But anyway, as a whole of country, statistics and information. We have a lot of information with respect to the number of IT graduates, the people who have taken IT courses, and the people who probably taken information security courses. We also do have information about how many people take certifications. Now, the problem we have here in the Philippines is it's not really consolidated, right? Having that in one place and seeing like what is the state of IT awareness or IT security capability here is not that easy to find, right? So that's the first statement. The second statement is we're not big fans of certification. So we don't see a lot of IT practitioners. I know a lot of really, really good cybersecurity professionals who don't have the alphabet soup after their names, right? So that one also makes it harder to measure, right? Because they can be quite good. They actually work in fields that are very relevant and they do their jobs well, but they don't have the alphabet soup in their name. Therefore, when we do a survey or we take statistics, we don't see that. Now, the job hunting sites, for example, will also keep track of these things, but this would be in the context of private employment. So I think that's one of the areas that needs improvement as well. Because if we're going to require a lot of these policies, we need to be able to staff them. And that's the reason why whenever we think of policy solutions, even though it is just minimum information security standards, right, we still need people to enforce and help the agencies and organizations through that. So that's one of the challenges that we think should be looked at, right? I am pretty sure that a lot of agencies would step up to the task. For example, the ICT does have a group that watches that. They do it already in the context of the BPO and ITO industry. I think it wouldn't be a stretch to expand that to information security. Just a few thoughts in mind. Thank you.
So, William, based on the tangible data that you have, the obvious and the not so obvious data that you have, would you say we have a deep bench for cybersecurity talent here in the Philippines?
We have a potentially deep bench, right? So we do have a very highly IT literate population for sure. We adapt to technology very, very well, right? We actually do supply a lot of IT professionals, not just for our own needs, but for the export market. So definitely the potential bench is there. Now, what we do lack, for example, is we do lack specifics, right? So for example, cybersecurity in particular, how would we count the number of cybersecurity professionals vis-a-vis regular information security professionals? The canonical way of doing that is to count certifications. But since we don't take a lot of that, right, it's hard to count. So right now, that's our gap, because the more traditional ways, how many people have this cybersecurity certification, that cybersecurity certification, that's not a very big number now. So that's why I add the word potential, because I think the talent is there, the capability is there, the willingness is there, but being able to quantify it more needs a lot more work. But I do believe it is an initiative that just wait and see. Maybe when we have another launch for another event, that is one of the key topics that is being worked on right.
All right. And to talk about how you turn that potential into a reality, this question is for Grace. How can schools better help in raising cybersecurity awareness among the youth who can then share knowledge with their respective families?
Thanks for that question. Actually, I would say we have to start at home first, no? Target the parents and the guardians, the adults at home, in raising awareness about basic cyber hygiene. You saw in the video earlier, you have to strengthen your password. You know, these basic things. Be cautious about sharing your personal information, especially on social media. As we wrote in an article recently, in the comfort of our homes, we buy products using online, using apps that are electronically linked to our bank account. And the same account is used to load cash in our mobile wallet attached to our phone number, which is then verified using an email address that we use to log in to our social media account. So if, as you can imagine, if one platform is hacked, all others can easily be affected. And since, students are in their homes and the parents are using their accounts to coordinate with the school and use it for their online classrooms, and then all of these things can be compromised. So I would say that start at home. But in terms of schools, we need to incorporate cybersecurity in formal education. We can start actually in basic education with remote learning right now. Even my preschooler is already aware of, how to use online platforms. We should get the buy-in of the DepEd, definitely, the school administration and the parents, as I mentioned. And I think teaching digital natives, which is essentially all our children, is now easier. My 6-year-old, for example, knows more about YouTube than me. So I mean, he's more the expert than me when it comes to manipulating these online platforms. So and I think that in fact some schools are already doing this practice of cyber hygiene and raising awareness because of online learning. And we then have to institutionalize this not only in the schools, but the DepEd should have probably a policy that can be adopted by all schools nationwide. Thanks for the
Wow,
question.
Grace, your 6-year-old is now a master of YouTube, and here I am still struggling to remember the last password I used for the change password for my banking account. Anyways, here's another question. This one is for Director Caloy Reyes. The question is, what steps are the DICT and law enforcement agencies in the Philippines taking in order to prevent, prosecute, and punish cyber crimes, as well as to provide relief to victims of cyber crimes? Director Caloy?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a good question. Actually, we have this National Cybersecurity Interagency Committee led by the Executive Secretary of the Department of ICT, and the National Security Advisors as the co-chairs. We have delineated functions relative to the prevention. The ICT, its partner or its sister agencies such as the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordination Center, the National Privacy Commission, has the respective mandates to follow. In terms of law enforcement, specifically on investigation, we have our partners such as the Philippine National Police Anti-Cybercrime Group and the National Bureau of Investigations. For the matter of prosecution, we have been partnering with the Department of Justice and the National Prosecution Service. So end to end, we have this already, and the delineation of functions for each have been cleared. So hopefully our citizens would somehow know already where and what to report if in case they have been attacked, especially those victims of cybercrimes. So cybersecurity will be more focused on the DICT, while the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordination Center, including that of the law enforcement, handles cybercrime. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cole. Just a quick follow-up. I'm very curious, would you have an idea or data as to the number of cases, cybercrime cases, that the government, the DICT or DILG handle at any given point? And what is the success rate of prosecution?
Typically,
are we able to successfully? Yeah, go ahead.
The statistics belongs more to the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordination Center and the law enforcement agencies. Though, just to remind everybody, it's an exponential rate really. So we need really to be careful and be protective and think twice before you join or click anything.
Exponential growth in the number of cybercrimes handled. What's the success rate? Do we know, sir? Is it a 10% success rate in prosecution of these crimes? And what are the punishments? Maybe it's just a slap in the hand. Maybe we need, laws or policies, punishments with more teeth.
Yeah, again, it's more on the cybercrime issue, and I think the better agency to have this address is the cybercrime investigation. Though we have the punishment and prosecution is very clear in RA 10175. So I guess it's more on the law enforcement institutions.
All right, thank you, Director Caloy. Here's another question. This time, this is for William and for Grace. What is the best way for someone to get started on learning cybersecurity skills? So what's the best way, Grace and William?
Okay. Grace, ladies first.
No, please. No, go ahead, William. You're a practitioner, so you'll know better.
All right. So basically, it depends on what you're going to do it for, right? So, for example, if you want to be a practitioner, the path is fairly different from if you're just a regular user of information technology. Let's start with the regular user of information technology. Now, there are many websites, there are many contents, there are many courses meant for regular users. So for example, the United States CISA will actually have websites specific for example, what will a small business do with respect to information security? Or what would a individual do with respect to information security? Now, these courses focus more on cyber hygiene. The UK actually has a cybersecurity center that has their portal has different sites specific to particular target audiences. So for example, they have one specifically for small businesses alone. It's a small business practitioner. These are the things that you can do. These are the things that you can follow. Now, that one is one way, right? And I think we don't even have to dig really, really deep. I think there are some very, very practical things like, not writing down your password, Mimi. That's one of the things that I leave for you, right? Don't do that, right? And longer is better. There are things like that that actually work out. Now that's on one end, but I think the question is more focused on cybersecurity professional. So in terms of cybersecurity professional, this goes back to the question a while ago about measures. How many cybersecurity professionals we have in the Philippines? Certifications are still, we have to admit, they're not the ultimate basis of whether you're good or not, but it actually helps us measure. So I think taking these cybersecurity certifications is actually a good first step. Now in the Philippines, we have a lot of people who actually take this, and we do have organizations. I'm part of two, for example, that will promote this, but I think we need more. Now the nice thing about a certification program is it has a base framework, right? It will cover enough of certain aspects of cybersecurity and information technology to get you going. It will not make you an expert overnight, but at least it covers the breadth, right? So that's the second one. Now, as an additional point, right? So that's for the individual, for individual learning. In addition to that, depending on what sector you're in, there will be sector-specific things that you should know. If you're in the banking and finance sector, PCI DSS is a good place to start. If you're in the healthcare sector, there is HIPAA, which doesn't apply in the Philippines because it's in the States, but it's a good framework to follow, right? So you can actually look at all of these standards and certifications as a baseline. It actually makes you a better practitioner because there are specific, courses that specific search courses and things that people will look for. So those are the two ends. As an individual and by yourself, or a small business owner, and there is for cybersecurity professional. So not the best answer, the adding alphabet soup letters at the end of your name, but it does help us as a country. It's easier to measure, and it does, at least it's a baseline framework.
Grace?
Yes, actually, I'm a newbie in cybersecurity, but in terms of ICT policy, it's always been the case where skills is always a problem. I would add to what William said, usually when we talk about building skills, we are so centered on the NCR, in the capital, metropolitan cities. I would like to pose a challenge actually to government and to institutions to please look outward. There are many skills out there in the provinces, in the countryside, and we need to make sure that our priorities should not only include the highly urbanized metropolitan centers, but also looking at centers of excellence in the countryside. And that's where I think the challenge is. It's not actually something that we have right now, but we can tap into universities, we can tap into associations, ICT councils and associations in the countryside. So it's a huge challenge, but of course we have to start somewhere.
Just a quick follow-up. I get this impression that the infrastructure is broadly more secure these days, but the people aren't. You can set up the strongest cybersecurity, the walls to protect your company, your business, and then you've got that one employee who clicks on the wrong link, and that's it. It goes down the drain. And on an individual basis, maybe I can ask Grace and William, can you talk to us about social engineering schemes? There are hackers who look at what we post on Facebook, on Instagram, and we're a social media capital of the world, and then they can tailor fit these malicious links that can lure you into clicking something and hacking into your system. Plus emails. I mean, we're at 21st century. How are we still getting tricked by emails? So that's the follow-up question for ordinary Filipinos like myself.
So allow me to start. So social engineering is at the core of a lot of cybersecurity exploits nowadays. We may see, for example, in the news, Colonial Pipeline getting hacked, but how did the hacker get in, right? More often than not, it is a social engineering exploit. It was some employee that clicked something that they weren't supposed to click. Now, smishing, phishing, and all the ishing, vishing, there are so many ishings out there already. It's becoming more and more popular. And like Grace mentioned at the start of our presentation, there is a social aspect of that, right? The I love you virus and all, the need to belong. So that's an important answer. Now, what we should do is we should be a little more discerning about where these links come from and whether we should click them or not. I think it has just gotten harder because in the past, we didn't have that many opportunities to click on links. In the early days of the internet, it was just email. Now we're bombarded with chat group for this, chat group for that, chat group for this. Then we have SMS from this, SMS from that. Then we have our online shopping channels that attempt to upsell and cross-sell. It is so easy to get confused already now. Now, there are things that we are trying to do as an industry. So, for example, the banking, telco industries are working hard to find ways to make smishing and phishing harder. Right, so we're trying to educate users to say, if this came from the bank, it can't happen. So, for example, Singapore has done an extreme. You cannot, a bank cannot issue an email or a text message with a clickable link. That's no longer possible. That means if you want to do a promo, you have to log into an actual website or your online banking and you have to go there. There's no convenience link, right? Unlike the normal way of doing these marketing promos, from Bank X, please click on link, that's no longer possible in Singapore. Now, Singapore did one extreme, right? You really cut off convenience, but it's a lot more secure because then you have to log into your internet banking. You're sure it is your internet bank site, right? And it's a lot more secure. But the probability of upselling and cross-selling just become harder.
You mentioned about banks, William. I'm not sure if you guys have experienced this, but I've got some people from the bank calling me on my mobile using a personal number. And they say they're using a bank mandated number. What do you do? From a cybersecurity perspective, and they start asking you, can you confirm that this is your birth date, that this is your mother's maiden name?
Oh, don't do that. So
what do we do?
So I think as a general rule, if somebody calls you that you do not know, do not give personal information, do not give information, period. Right? The only time that information can be called or collected is if there was a transaction, right? That is happening. But even that, I recommend to people, you call the bank. So if somebody calls you, I'm from the bank, we have this transaction for you, but we need that additional information. I normally suggest that they call the bank, especially if it's from an unlisted number and things like that. Because you'll never know where that comes from. That could just be a phishing attack. That's just masquerading as a bank transaction. Two is you probably know what transactions are, happening. So if you don't expect an inbound forex exceeding $20,000, I don't think you're supposed to be expecting calls like that, right? So there are things that may not be obvious, but it happens. But as a general rule, I just tell people, don't give personal information out over the phone unless you made that call, because it's really hard.
Again, cutting the convenience part, but safer for everybody. Noted. Here's a question for Grace. Grace, cybersecurity policy in the Philippines seems to be more reactive than proactive. Is it still possible for the Philippines to catch up and turn the tide by coming up with policies which anticipate rather than react when a new technology comes out?
Thanks for that question. But Mimi, I'd like to add to what
Go
William
ahead.
said earlier about how we can protect ourselves. No, So William mentioned something about the need to belong, and the I love you virus, preying on the human vulnerability of the need for affection. Nowadays,
Or
we
need
also
to
have this.
forward messages, Grace.
Yeah, the need to forward message. Exactly. So related to that, now we also have this, this urge to the need to send instant replies that we're always on. And the pandemic has definitely worsened that now for everyone. So usually, William mentioned phishing, smishing. There's also such a thing as CEO fraud and phishing. It's very common in the corporate world, no? So what these social engineers would do is to trick you into acting on something urgent. Otherwise, there will be a consequence. So anything that would ask you to do something immediately because there's a consequence, usually there's a catch there. So what happens is that these social engineers would usually they would pretend to be an official of the company, or the CEO is asking you to do this and that. So of course, being the subservient people that we are, we want to instantly respond to these things. So be very careful with that. And Mimi also mentioned earlier that the convenience usually would, we fall prey to that, and then we want to do something instantly. We have to think long and hard now about doing shortcuts. QR codes, for example. Do not scan these QR codes that you see everywhere. These are marketing ploys, but you don't know where these QR codes would take you. And you have to realize that unless you know that these QR codes are generated by legitimate companies, then please do not scan them. Okay, as to the question on about proactive policy, sakit yan everywhere in any country. Usually policymakers would not really want to put policy out there, and they're always behind technological advancements and innovation. I guess we can say that the status quo, if it's working for policymakers and some industry players, they would want to retain that. Anything that is disruptive is seen as a threat, and it's challenging. But the way we see it is that the consequence of these disruptions, little trickles at that, would eventually amount to something bigger and something more complicated than what we can respond to. So to us, for secure connections, the answer would really be putting in place minimum information security standards. Minimum meaning across the board, anyone, whether it's a big company, it's a small organization, in the city or in the province. These are very basic minimum standards that groups of people, institutions can actually apply. And there are many internationally accepted standards out there, and William mentioned them earlier. So we have to make sure that across the board, we are all adopting these standards, and we have to raise awareness about these standards. ISO, of course, is the globally accepted gold standard when it comes to information security, but there are others that would fit the size, the nature, and the level of sophistication that other organizations have. So we just need to push that these minimum standards be institutionalized and become policy. Kumbaga, nasa grade school level tayo, as Sec Manny mentioned to us in one meeting. We're still at the very basic education level. So more and more, as we adopt these minimum standards, we can assess our capability after so many years, and then we can decide through, of course, the leadership of the DICT, whether we are ready to adopt more stringent and higher requirements using standards such as the ISO standard. But essentially, minimum information standards for all, more stringent standards for critical infrastructure.
Grace, just a quick follow-up about minimum information standards. For ordinary Filipinos like myself, we're not techie. Sometimes we wonder what happens to the data we give out when it moves on to a third party, a service provider, or another group. For example, earlier this year, so many people went on social media to complain about getting text messages about the same job offers from random numbers. Is that a clear example of hacking? And the number one suspicion that we have, I count myself in this group, is that it probably came from the contact tracing initiatives. I mean, every time I entered a mall, every time I entered a bank, I gave them my name, I gave them some health data, I gave them my number, I gave them my address, I gave them my vaccination status. What do you think? How do you make sense of that?
That's a controversial question. So I'll let William answer it.
Yeah,
William,
I'll take that.
go ahead,
I'll
William.
take that.
I'm pretty sure you got a job offer as well.
Yes,
No?
of course,
Yes.
of course. Yes, yes. So I did, and I was shocked. 50,000 pesos per day.
Yes.
Wow, wonderful. No, back to the point, data, because that's a data leak, right? So that particular incident, it may not have been an actual system that was breached per se, but definitely data was leaked somewhere. Your phone number, my phone number, Grace's phone number was leaked somehow, somewhere. Now, could it be contact tracing? Maybe, but it could also be other things like that promo you filled out or that raffle ticket you joined in a grocery store raffle. There are many places where information can be leaked, right? So jumping to conclusions that it was contact tracing might be premature. It is possible, but it's very hard to tell at this point. So that's the first thing. The second thing is data has been leaked many, many times in many, many places. Even before the Data Privacy Act came to fore, we've already seen information leak. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't illegal at the time. There is a healthy marketplace for buying telephone numbers in the world, right? So these databases can actually be acquired. So that's another point. As a matter of fact, you can even hire marketing agencies that promise, I already have a database of 50 million Filipinos, right? And these campaigns are simply exploiting that, right? You're taking advantage of information that was either legally, illegally acquired somehow, and just managed to find its way to the different places. Now, we've already hit this point where I am assuming by default that my number is out there somewhere. And that's the reason why every time I get a promo message or a job offer message, I don't pay attention anymore. Right? I've gotten desensitized already because it's gotten so bad. Now, should we tolerate that? I think we shouldn't, right? So as a population, I think we should expect better. Well, hopefully the work at the National Privacy Commission and at the DICT will start to hunt down. And we've seen it. I mean, they are going after, for example, lending institutions with nefarious lending practices, right? They're going after marketing firms that blast call market, right? Some of these, or actually a lot of these, can be traced. Because the thing about online, there's a digital footprint somewhere. So given enough effort and regulatory muscle, they can actually be tracked, right? And the goal is basically you take them down, send a strong signal to the industry that we will not tolerate this. I think it's a good step. Now we as the people, right, we just have to be more discerning, as Grace mentioned, right? We should avoid the need to reply right away, forward right away. I think taking a pause whenever we get this and thinking through it, just even for like 1 minute more, can do wonders versus replying or forwarding right away. And it also helps with the other problem, which is the fake news thing, right? Because fake news spreads because of our desire to forward the message right away. As a matter of fact, I have resisted forwarding messages for quite a while already because of this, right? So again, like that little pause, I think helps as well.
And also, Mimi, just to add, no, if you do receive these text messages, don't reply. Because then they'll know that your number is active. So they're also keeping tabs of who I used to have. I used to do this practice of trying to respond to these scammers and threatening them that I'll report them to the NTC, to the NPC, NBI. But then I think it was, I don't know if it was William or somebody else in the Secure Connections team that actually cautioned me against answering these text messages.
And
just
maybe,
one more thing.
Go ahead.
Grace raises a good point about not replying, but what you can do is the operators have hotlines and websites where you can report these numbers. So you can actually report, for example, if you get a spam phishing SMS message from an unknown source that did not identify him or herself properly, you can go to a telco website and just post that number there, right? So they do have an active campaign at the moment to actually try to find these, nefarious actors.
And which leads us to the next question for William. Can you elaborate on the recommendation to establish a Philippine reporting system? Will this mean requiring institutions, whether government or private, to report any threats and attacks experienced, and who gets to act on what said report?
All right. So good question. First off, we're already required to report data breaches, right? So the Data Privacy Act already requires us to report data breaches. As a matter of fact, the Data Privacy Act does have a clause that also requires us to report information security in incidents as well, right? Of course, the threshold and the focus of the Data Privacy Act is mostly for data breaches, but that's also a good thing because when you breach an information system, there's probably personal information there. So we kind of already have something at the moment. So that's my first statement. The second statement is basically the DICT, including the National CERT, already has a framework for reporting, particularly for CII. Right, so there already is a national CERT which is being operated by the Cybersecurity Bureau of the DICT that already does this. They have a CERT itself, so they have a national CERT where you can actually report cybersecurity incidents. They also have sectoral certs that focus on particular sectors. So, for example, the BSP is the sectoral lead for finance and banking. You have the National Telecommunications Commission, which is the sector lead for telecommunications. So there already is a framework for that. As a matter of fact, in my private side of life, I actually already see when we sell an information system to a telecoms company, it's already part of the requirements that we should participate in the cyber drill. We should also report cybersecurity incidents to these sectoral certs. So there is a framework that exists. I think it's more of enforcement because the way it's phrased today is you should report cybersecurity incidents, but most people don't, right? And depending on the strength of the sector lead, some are very strict. Like the BSP is very strict. They actually have a regulation, I think it's 1018, that requires you to report a cybersecurity incident within 48 hours. So for example, that's a very strict one. But other sectors may not even have a sector lead, for example. So again, different parts of the country, different levels of maturity.
All right. You mentioned telcos, William. Is it time for government to mandate all SIM cards to be registered, you think? Will registering all SIM cards instead of selling an unlimited number of prepaid cards with no accountability, should that be pursued seriously by the next administration? I mean, that's going to cut a lot of the problems, I can imagine.
Well, we're already at this point where the law is already out there, right? I mean, I think it's just waiting for the president's signature. So the SIM card registration act has already been passed. Now, there are some challenges with the act. I mean, the intention is good, but again, the other side of the equation is you create a single pot where that information is there as well, right? So again, that is also a juicy target for information breaches and the like. I mean, if you were already concerned about contact tracing, what more about the SIM card registration database, right? So that one is something we should take note of. Now, I am a firm believer in attestation, right? Who you should be, who you say you are. Now, there are grades of attestation, like if you are a bank or a commercial institution that needs to reach out to its subscribers, then there should be a way to know that that bank is really who the bank says it is. So that one I think is important. Now, the law has a lot of problems in my view. I mean, the social media prohibition I think was premature. It's very hard to enforce, that it may make the whole law challenging to enforce. So I think there are things that can be focused on. I think it's a good, I think the intention is good, but how it will be implemented will really have to see.
All right. We don't have much time. I just wanted to throw in this final question. Big picture question now. You know, the Philippines is making a pitch to become a data center hub for Southeast Asia. We want big companies to, move their data centers here, which means we're going to be handling a ginormous amount of data, critical data. In fact, Globe Telecom just announced making a $350 million joint venture with its parent Ayala Corp and the Singapore-based company to set up this side of the business. Are we ready? Is the Philippines ready? And we are seeing a leadership change in about 2 months. What do you think should be? I know we've listed down a lot of recommendations, but for the next president, what should be the first thing they do for cybersecurity? What should be their first act of business for cybersecurity? So 2 things. Are we ready to be the data center hub of the region? And what should be the first order of business on cybersecurity for the next president?
So I'll take it.
Very quick. Go
I'll take
ahead.
that first, right? So first, for data center hub, I think we do have manpower, talent, we do have real estate, and we do have the willingness to do it. And I think the major players have already made major investments, right? So the large telecom companies here have made substantial investments in that space. One of the things we have to pay attention to, though, is cost of power. That has always been a historical problem. Data centers are very power intensive. So whenever we enter such an initiative, we have to make sure that we do have a decent amount of power. Any major data center operator will be concerned about their electricity bill. So that's one of the things that might be looked at. But definitely in all other aspects, we're okay. Now, size of market, we may not be that big, but doing it on behalf of other countries may work. We are, let's just say, we're geographically blessed as being the gateway to Asia, both netographically and geographically. The fiber optic cables pass this part of the world. So it does make sense actually to be that. Maybe some of the initiatives that can be had is, use of sustainable energy might be a good step. We are blessed with a lot of sunlight and wind, which I think will solve the power issue. Now, on the second point, I did write an article, I think, about what I would suggest the next president would do. But definitely, the 3 points I mentioned a while ago are the minimum, right? Protect critical infrastructure, right? Improve reporting, and of course, capability building. Secretary Kaintik also mentioned it a while ago. We are drafting an EO actually for that as well. So we're starting at the basics, right? And I hope that of course, I wish the current administration would pass it, but if not, the next administration, because this is one of those issues that I think should not be partisan, right? It can cross political lines, and I think it's important for all.
All right. Thank you, Grace.
Sorry, just to add, yes, thank you. William mentioned the cost of power, but hearing from those in the countryside, it's also important to have clean power. Fluctuations in power is in electricity is very important because it can damage facilities. So for to have data centers and have data hubs, not only in Metro Manila or Luzon, but in other provinces as well, we need to make sure that our power is clean. And the second point, which you mentioned earlier, is also having all these investment in data centers. But I would like to emphasize, being also an advocate of better internet PH, that we need to have more telco neutral facilities, telco neutral data centers. We need to diversify actually, because as William mentioned, we do not want to have a single point of attack. And if all of these facilities are owned by telcos, the big telcos, then we might have a problem in the long run. So I'm very glad to hear that data centers that are not affiliated to the current telcos are also entering the market. So diversification is actually a good thing for promoting cybersecurity and resilience.
And Grace, first order of business for the next president, what do you think?
Well, William mentioned it earlier that we do hope that either this administration or the next president would issue an executive order. Why is that important? Because it is a directive from the chief executive himself. If we want to look at cybersecurity on a sectoral level, we need to make sure that the heads of government agencies are, of course, on board. And we need to emphasize that the DICT will be the lead in putting in place standards, but then having organizations have their own policy and protocol to make sure that their operation and their personnel are in line with these standards is very important. So the EO definitely would be the first order of business.
All right. Thank you, Grace and William. And thank you so much to our audience members for a very engaging discussion. If you have more questions or inquiries about the report, please email secure.connections.ph@gmail.com. Now, for the past hour and a half, we've actually heard from the DICT secretary himself and the experts about the growing challenges of cybersecurity. Cyber threats and risks are now part of our daily lives. So we must be equipped with the right policy and strategy, capacity, processes, and technologies to mitigate cyber risks. Now, there is no generation more equipped to understand and promote cybersecurity than the digital natives. So for the closing remarks, we have Mr. Angelo Nino Gutierrez, an emerging cybersecurity researcher at Secure Connections. Nino started his career in ICT research in 2016 and has since provided valuable technical analysis and support for policy research reports. He's also part of the Better Internet Philippines advocacy group, pushing for improved connectivity in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Nino Gutierrez. Nino?
Thank you, Miss Mimi. There you go. Thank you, and thank you everyone for staying with us over the past 2 hours. It's been a journey, definitely. We've been working on this report for 2 years, and we're more than happy to share this with everyone. And we hope everyone can check out the report later. And as several people have mentioned, to really read it from start to end and see what we see as a basis for discussion in the coming years, especially for the next administration. These are exciting times for Philippine cybersecurity, and we are glad to chart these waters with you. Now, when we say digital natives, we usually mean people from a younger generation, those born late enough to have grown with digital devices all around them. These people are native to the mostly unwritten rules and norms guiding behavior on the internet. But what does that mean for the rest of us? The COVID-19 pandemic has turned our world upside down. Whereas before, the digital proficiency gap between natives and everyone else was mostly an amusing topic for conversation, it is now a tangible divide with real consequences in a world of remote learning and work from home. For some people, this is like being dropped in a new world with strange rules and unknown threats, with little in the way of guidance. So, what are we to do? This is the very question that we've been considering over the past 2 years working on this report. And this is what we hope to share with you and continue to talk to you about in the coming days. In a way, being in a world of a newly digitized post-pandemic or new normal world is like being dropped in a new country. And as with our first time in any new locale, our first step is to get familiar and be knowledgeable about our surroundings. The cybersecurity landscape is full of unfamiliar terrain. Threats such as phishing and malware, all things we talked about, these threaten to trip us up in our new foray into the cybersecurity landscape. Just by learning more about what threats await us, we put ourselves in a better position to protect ourselves. Next, as we've already discussed, we need to establish default standards of behavior. Let me share with you that when I briefly lived in Japan, one of the most jarring changes I had to learn was to pass people on the left instead of the right. Similarly, we need to change our behavior online to reflect threats on the internet that might not necessarily be there in the real world. Commenting on a friend's photo with a personal anecdote might be fun in person, but online, it could give criminals an opportunity to steal personal data. Whether for individuals or organizations, learning new rules for behavior in the form of minimum information security standards will help us securely navigate unfamiliar digital terrain. Third, whether for individuals, organizations, or the government, we must not be afraid to ask questions and learn from those in the know. In the ever-changing world of cybersecurity, knowledge is power. Just as we should not be afraid to ask for directions when we are lost, we must learn from the knowledge and experience of other countries and organizations, especially those who have already dealt with different threats and risks. Similarly, we must be generous with our knowledge and share what we know with those around us. Last, we must not be afraid of the learning curve and understand that it is part of the process of taking part in a new digital world. What's more, the internet is called the web for a reason, because we are all linked together, and the compromise of one part could spell catastrophe for others. We must work to secure ourselves not only for our sake, but also for the sake of those around us. In this newly digital world, it is our social responsibility to ensure that we are doing all we can to keep safe. Ultimately, our report is a snapshot in time, a view from one perspective on where Philippine cybersecurity stands today. Things are bound to evolve and change, just as they have in the past. Our hope is that our report will be the start of a lively and proactive discussion across different sectors: public, private, civil society, the academe, to name a few, that will drive Philippine cybersecurity forward. We thank everyone in attendance for spending your morning with us and look forward to hearing your thoughts on our report. The Secure Connections team would also like to thank the Asia Foundation for its assistance in organizing the launch. We would also like to extend our sincerest gratitude to everyone who contributed to this report. Sam Sherik, I'm Faustino, Attorney Oliver Reyes, Kim Pobre, Justine Mendoza, Frith Manaysay, and Jana Pintor. Thank you, stay safe, and stay secure.
All right. Thank you so much, Nina, for that great synthesis and thought-provoking questions about the future of cybersecurity in the Philippines. We're joining the call for government and the private sector to invest more in cybersecurity and for all stakeholders to do their part in promoting cybersecurity. No one is safe until everyone is safe. Now it's time to reveal the results of the poll. The question that we posed earlier today was, what should be the number one priority of the government on cybersecurity? And survey says 35% said cybersecurity standards and policy. 22% said cybersecurity skills and awareness. 20% said critical infrastructure and protection. 18% cybersecurity technology, and 5% said international engagement and cooperation. Interesting answers there. Cybersecurity, truly an issue of this generation. We're also delighted with a good turnout and engaging discussions that we've had this morning. Thank you so much to everyone who stayed until the end of the program. Now it's time for our much awaited photo op with members of the audience, and we're going to be requesting all the attendees to kindly turn your videos on so we can include you in the gallery. And our photographers will now take your photos. Since there are several panels, we have a lot of attendees. We're going to have to ask all of you to please hold your smile for a few seconds. Froy from the team will be assisting us with this. Froy, go ahead.
All right. May I request everyone to please turn on their cameras? There you go. Cameras, please, and please hold on those smiles. All right, so I'll start with the first panel. 1, 2, 3, smile. Second one. One, two, three, smile. Oops, the others are not. Third panel. 1, 2, 3, smile. No video settings for the others. So okay, I think I've covered the panels at this point. Yep. Thank you so much. Or should we do another one with everyone turning on their cameras, or can the host enable the
Yes. We've got some attendees saying their cameras are
attendee?
disabled. All right.
So I think we can request Bas to inform us if the cameras of the videos of the participants can be turned on. Otherwise, we can proceed.
Yes, Grace, I think we should proceed with the link first
Okay.
until
All
we
right.
figure out the Zoom settings.
All
Thank you.
right.
All right. All right, but great smile to everyone, even if some of the cameras are turned off. Thank you so much. You may follow Secure Connections on LinkedIn and Twitter and subscribe to their bi-weekly news brief for the latest cybersecurity news and information relevant, of course, to the Philippines. Thank you so much for joining us. Secure Connections is happy to announce that a digital copy of the report is now available on the Asia Foundation's website. Please visit the link flashing on your screens right now. Congratulations again to Secure Connections and the Asia Foundation. Have a good day and stay cyber safe, everybody.
Thank you, Mimi. Congratulations, everyone.
Congratulations to the team.
Don't worry, this
Thanks,
QR
everyone.
code is safe, so you
I
can
was-
scan it. We assure you that it's a secure connection. Thank you.
Thank you.